And now it is my pleasure to lead a warm welcome to Jacksonville for the 42nd president of our great nation, President William Jefferson Clinton. Let's give him a warm Jacksonville welcome as he come out.
Thank you very much. Way to go. Thanks. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here. At my age, I feel a little awkward being on a stage of a performing arts center. My dance steps are not too good. My voice is a lower range. I told the folks backstage who were just introduced for their commitments to your community, when Alvin was introducing me, I said, now that is an example of Clinton's third law of politics, which is whenever possible, try to be introduced by someone to whom you gave a really good job. Because they will exaggerate your virtues and minimize your shortcomings. I am very proud of Alvin Brown. I saw him here speaking to you as a successful mayor and a fully grown man. When he came to me, he was a young man full of promise, full of dreams, full of hope. And I'm really proud of him as a human being and as a leader. And I'm grateful that he's your mayor. And I want to thank you, those of you who are here today. I want to thank the business leaders here. I want to thank the church leaders here. I want to thank the leaders of other civic organizations. And the main point I want to make today is self-evident by this crowd. I'll talk a little more about America's strengths and weaknesses and how they're manifested in Jacksonville. I want to thank your great representative in Congress, Corinne Brown, who was a great friend and supporter of mine. I'm grateful to her and the others who are here. But I spend a lot of my life today in America working on seemingly intractable problems like this rising childhood obesity and the burdens that the baby boomers will put on the health care system and our children and their ability to raise our grandchildren unless we maintain a higher standard of health. I do some work in trying to promote economic empowerment for small businesses in very poor inner city areas around America with entrepreneurs from Inc. magazine. But most of my time I spend in places that for a lot of you would be unrecognizable. I mean, just think of all the things we're taking for granted here. You would be shocked if the microphone failed, if the lights went out, if the air conditioning failed and all this hot air I'm putting out would make you uncomfortable. If you get bored with my speech, you can excuse yourself and go to the restroom or get a glass of water. I spend a lot of my life in places where none of that can be taken for granted. But here's what I see everywhere in the world. Intelligence and the willingness to work and the dreams of children are universally distributed, but opportunity is not. And the problems we face are complicated, and they often don't have a perfect solution. The only thing that's really working in the world everywhere today is when you have business and government and the citizen sector, the non-governmental sector, working together. Creative networks of cooperation work. And yet we seem hardwired for conflict. Yesterday I was in New Orleans speaking to the National Association of Wireless Communication Producers, mostly cell phones, but other wireless stuff too. And the president of that association is Steve Largent, who those of you who are of a certain age will remember he was an all-pro for many years at the Seattle Seahawks. And then afterward he was a Republican congressman from Oklahoma, a very worthy opponent. I was always scared of Largent because he's totally straight. You know, he never played games. He always said what he said, but he was also reasonable. We could work together. And I was kidding him because he majored in biology in college, which is not what people normally think football players do, but he did. And I said, you know, Steve, I now understand all this partisan conflict in Washington. We're hardwired because last year there was a big new breakthrough in the studies of the human genome. And by the way, I spent a lot of your tax money on that when I was president. Because I knew if we could, I knew if we could sequence the human genome, we would find, as we already have, the primary genetic variances would put baby girls at high risk of developing breast cancer when they're young. And with nanotechnology, within 10 years or so, everybody that lives at least in a place with a good health system will be able to get 3 or 4 health scans a year. You just walk into a tube and they scan you. And because we know about these variances and we know what to look for, I think mastectomies and even deaths from breast cancer will be a thing of the past within 10 years or so. And we're getting close. We're getting closer to resolving the riddle of Alzheimer's, which is really important, not just for families, all of us who've lost family members who died with Alzheimer's, but for dealing with the otherwise unmanageable problem of the retirement of the baby boomers and the health care cost we can impose on our kids. But last year we got a funny discovery. Last year the researchers discovered that unless your ancestors are 100% from sub-Saharan Africa, which includes probably not a single African American, right? 100% from sub-Saharan Africa. Between 1% and 4% of your genome comes from our pre-human ancestors, the Neanderthals, because they were bigger than we were. Their brains were about the same size. They never learned to talk, and we probably outlasted them on the planet because we could run and they couldn't. And in the 40,000 years we shared the earth together, there were giant mammals who were devouring folks that looked like us. And we could run and they couldn't. You know the old joke about the 2 guys that come on the bear in the woods and one guy takes off running and he said, "You fool, you can't outrun the bear." And he said, "I don't have to outrun the bear." So anyway, so when I called my wife full of expectancy that she would, because we have tried to master science as we've gotten older, and I told her about this, she was not surprised to learn that I was part Neanderthal. She said, "I knew that all along." But she was stunned to find out that she was too. Now, what's the serious point of that? We grow stronger because of our diversity. We grow stronger because of our different experiences, the different ways our brains work, the way we come to different opinions about the world, the way the world should be approached. And it all works if our goal is to synthesize our differences and come up with a common approach. What is succeeding everywhere in the world today are networks of creative cooperation. And yet, what is holding our country back, I think as much as anything else, is apparently irreconcilable conflict. And I want to say, look, nobody loves politics more than me. Nobody loved elections more than I did. Nobody appreciates a good argument better than I do. And it's very important for the simple reason that nobody's right all the time, and a broken clock is right twice a day. Right? And all the rest of us, poor human beings, we are condemned to spend our lives between those two extremes. Almost every one of us are going to be right more than twice a day. Otherwise, society would break down, right? And none of us are going to be right all the time. So the arguments, the differences, the party system, all this stuff can be really helpful if your goal is to reach a point where we can bring everybody together and do something that advances everybody. And I was really disappointed the other day after that Indiana Senate primary where Senator Lugar was defeated. I like Senator Lugar, but you know, it's not the end of his life. He served, whatever, 36 years in the Senate, and he was 80 years old, and I figured he was going to lose the race. But afterward, his opponent, whom I found very likable personally, and I identified with his hardscrabble upbringing, and he's an engineer and he's interested in solving problems. But he said, you know, we just have to stop all this effort to compromise in Washington. The Congress shouldn't try to compromise with the president, and the parties within Congress shouldn't try to compromise, because our views are so diametrically opposed. We just have to keep fighting until one of us wins. And we have to force the American people to choose. Now, if I were just a selfish Democrat, I would say, okay, I'll take that break. The demography's working for us. But it's not smart. You would get nowhere in Jacksonville if you followed that conflict model. If you look everywhere in the world where people are succeeding, if you look at the countries with the highest income growth, the biggest, most robust middle classes, the most success in letting people work their way from poverty into the middle class, what you see is networks of cooperation between a vibrant private economy, a strong and effective government, and increasingly what is loosely called civil societies or non-governmental organizations, which include all the churches represented here. Because there's always a gap between what the private sector can produce and the government can provide. Somebody's got to step into it. And creative organizations who don't either have to run a quarterly profit, they just have to balance their books, which is what a church with a social mission does, right? And don't have to be worried like politicians do about making a mistake and looking bad in the newspaper, can try to figure out how to do things faster, cheaper, better. And that's what I do with my foundation all around the world. So the most important thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you for being here together. Thank you for building these alliances. Thank you for understanding intuitively that creative cooperation works better than constant conflict. And in the world we live in, if you think about the complexity of the problems that we face, and the fact that we have these challenges that can only be met together, it's the only thing that makes any sense. Essentially, we're living in the most interdependent age in human history. I mean, just look around here today. If we had had this meeting in Jacksonville 40 years ago, would it have looked like this? There wouldn't be as many different skin colors in the room. There wouldn't be nearly as many women in the room. There wouldn't be as many young people in the room. Most people would look like me, old gray-haired white guys in suits. Now, I will say I'm very grateful that my demographic has not been entirely excluded from this meeting. I thank you for that. But this is the wave of the future. And we all, each in our own way, have to figure out how to make this work. Now, here's where we are in America. We live in an interdependent world, but whether it's here or where I just came from Mexico City, where the air quality now is equal to or greater than Los Angeles. It used to be one of the filthiest cities in the world because they got together and worked together and figured out how to clean the air and make money doing it. I just came from Costa Rica, a country that's poor by our standards. Their income's about $11,400, but it's by light years the richest country in Central America because it's the only Latin American country that never abandoned democracy for the last 60 years, because they decided they would live with their environment and make money out of it instead of plunder it, so that 26% of the country is national park, 51% of it's covered in forest. While they were growing like crazy for the last 10 years, they actually added to their forest cover. And yet 40% of their exports are high-tech exports because they've attracted the interest of Silicon Valley, which is now financing green technologies as well as high-tech products. But this meeting I was at, you had the business community, you had the people representing the working people's organizations, you had all these people from poor villages. Every one of them has a neat, clean school. Every one of them's got access to a health care clinic. And they're all sitting around talking about what they can do together. I do a lot of work in Brazil. Can you imagine a national meeting like this in America? I went to the edge of the rainforest to a city called Manaus. Every chamber of commerce of every sizable city was represented. Every utility was represented. The big banks were represented. The oil companies were represented. And the president of the Green Party, who ran third in the race for president, was there. All the people trying to save the rainforest were there. You should hope they succeed, as 20% of the oxygen we get on Earth from non-ocean sources. And people representing these native Indian tribes were there who have lived for thousands of years in the rainforest. And they said, wow, we got two big problems. Because we're trying to be the greenest big country on Earth. 85% of our electricity is renewable. It comes from hydropower. But the only places left where the rivers run deep enough and strong enough for dams, and we're growing, we need it, are in the rainforests. So what do? Cut down the rainforest or find some other way to generate electricity? Wow, we are the only big country in the world that uses less gasoline than biofuels, because Brazilian cane ethanol produces 9.3 gallons of ethanol for every gallon of gasoline required to produce it. Way the best in the world. Almost 4 times greater than corn ethanol in America. And they don't use the rainforest. They need deep topsoil. But the more of it they claim to produce more ethanol, 5 years in a row, they're going to use more ethanol than fuel. The more they force the soybean farmers, and those of you who know anything about that know soybeans have tiny little root structures, and the rainforest has thin topsoil, and the cattle ranchers into the rainforest. So he said, what do? Start burning more gasoline and dealing with the pollution and paying the import bill, or keep pushing the cattle ranchers and the soybean farmers into the rainforest? And they all are sitting there from every one of these interests saying, you know, there's not an easy answer to this. Nobody's treated like the enemy. And they're sitting there honestly trying to figure out what is the best solution on these two problems for an inherently difficult problem. And I don't know how they're going to resolve it, but I do know this. The way they're doing it is the most important thing. So if you don't remember anything else I say today, the way you're doing Jacksonville is the most important thing. Getting everybody represented, making everybody feel like they matter, treating everybody like they have a voice that deserves to be heard. I'm dealing with this complex problem of childhood obesity in America. There are no devils here. How we wound up with all these kids with type 2 diabetes is a consequence of 5 or 6 different factors that have joined together that no one could have predicted at the time. But I know this. I went to the soft drink manufacturers and the juice manufacturers, and I said, look, guys, you don't want all these kids growing up with type 2 diabetes. You don't want all these 30-year-olds with a leg amputated. You don't want all these middle-aged people dropping dead of heart attacks and strokes. You want them to be buying Coca-Cola and Pepsi when they're 35 or 40. And I don't believe you're bad. And I don't believe we have to have a big soft drink tax to deal with this, but the truth is, there are cities all over America where children are getting 50 to 60% of their total calories only from the drinks they consume at school. So let's figure out how you can make money with a different model. And they got rid of all the full sugar soft drinks. They lowered the portion size of the fruit juices, which have a lot of sugar. They got rid of the full fat milk and went to lower fat milk. They put a lot of flavored water in the vending machines and other things. And the bottom line is, for more than 90% of the schools in America, there has been an 88% reduction in the calories delivered to be served to kids in schools in vending machines and cafeterias. 88%. And because they did it together and worked together, the enterprises are still going to be profitable. So creative cooperation works. Now, what does that mean in America, and what are you up against? We all know Florida had a big home mortgage crisis, got hit more than on average in the rest of the country. I got to give a little kudo here to Wells Fargo. Of all the big banks in America, they were the smallest contributor to the problem. And I really respect the way they handled it. I thank them. But here's the deal. For 500 years, Every time a country experienced a financial collapse, like we did on September 15, 2008, it normally takes 5 to 10 years to get back to full employment. If there's a mortgage collapse on top of it, which we had, which could only have happened in the last 200 years or so when buildings had been widely held in private hands, either corporations or individuals. Normally it pushes it toward 10 years. I had 7 Japanese prime ministers in the 8 years I served because they had a banking collapse occasioned by a commercial building collapse, and after 10 years they still hadn't returned to full employment. So as Americans, what our job is as Americans is to beat the clock. That is, there's no way we could have returned to full employment in 4 years, but you should know this. We've now replaced, with 4 million private sector jobs, all the jobs lost from the bottom of the recession. We're 600,000 short because of state and local job cutbacks, because they don't get to print money, and when the stimulus ran out, they didn't have the money to do it. UCLA alone in California lost $300 million in 1 year, one of the great universities of America. But the private sector is coming back. So if you look at our strengths and our problems, our great strengths are, let's start with what the positives are all over America. The size of the economy, it's still the biggest in the world. The workforce is the world's most diverse, which is a good thing. If you live in a country with 4% of the people and you got 20% of the income, you got to sell something to somebody else. So it's a good thing to have somebody here from everywhere. And we're younger. We're younger than Europe. We're younger than Japan. And within 20 years, believe it or not, we're going to be younger than China. And having lost it, I can tell you, youth matters. I mean, demographics determine your destiny to a great degree, which means we got to be real careful with this immigration thing and not overdo our sense of being threatened by immigrants. They are the reason that our population grows at a steady rate and grows in an age group which will enable us to grow the economy. We have fabulous universities and research and development capacities, and it's a real strength. It's still about the easiest place in the world to start a small business, and there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in America. We have very good venture capital networks like the one in Silicon Valley that's always picking the next opportunity and putting money into it. The Chinese doubled the government's investment in solar technology, for example, last year, and they were twice what we were spending, but we invested more money because of the private entrepreneurs. And all these things are really, really worth something. The fact that we've got all this new natural gas in America, and that by every measure we rank first or second in the world in the capacity to generate electricity from the sun and the wind, is worth something. When President Bush was governor of Texas, the second President Bush, I think the best thing he did was to provide economic incentives to develop the wind energy. On a good day in Texas now, 25% of their electricity comes from the wind. And an Energy Department study showed that in North Dakota alone, which is now the center of our new natural gas boom and oil boom because of the new technologies, North Dakota alone, enough wind blows to electrify 25% of America. And that means between that and the natural gas, we can be free of the Middle East. We can be free of other places. This is really worth something. But I'll bring this back home to Jacksonville. Here's the biggest problem. With the exception of the extraordinary development in Southern California and the work being done in the cities of Arizona and Nevada, by and large, and Florida is an exception because it's highly urbanized, but with that exception, the sun shines brightest and the wind blows hardest where the people are not. So it means that if you wanted to maximize all this, you'd have to build a new electrical grid in America that had the capacity to take the energy from where it is to where the people are. So it's something that the country needs to be thinking about, but I'll come back to that. These are enormous strengths. Now, what are our problems? we haven't resolved the mortgage crisis quick enough to suit me, and I won't bore you with all the details, but I think that if we could rapidly accelerate that, clean those bad mortgage loans off the bank books, I think there would be a real burst of small business lending and small business borrowing, and America would settle down. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. The second problem is our school dropout rate is too high, and we don't have enough kids going to college and graduating when they do go. We have fallen in the last decade from 1st to 15th in the world in the percentage of our young adults with college degrees. And a lot of it is pure cost. The average young person gets a bachelor's degree with $25,000 to $30,000 in debt. You get a medical degree, your average debt's going to be over $200,000. And the Congress passed, and the representatives voted for it, a great reform in the student loan program, which will allow young people to pay their college debt back if they get a federally guaranteed student loan as a fixed small percentage of their income for up to 20 years, which means nobody will ever have to drop out again if they're dependent on, if they qualify for a federal guaranteed loan. You'll never have to drop out of college again, and you'll never have to pick a job based on your loan obligation. Your loan obligation will be determined by the job you pick. So you can be a school teacher, you can be a nurse, you can be a police officer, you can do this. This is a big deal. We're still doing well in technology developments. The agreement, again, I bet a lot of you don't even know this because there was no fight about it in Washington. The most important bipartisan, multi-sector agreement made in Washington in the last few years was made by the automobile industry, the automobile workers, all the environmental groups, and the federal government, where they agreed together on a schedule to raise car mileage standards, which will reduce pollution and create 150,000 new jobs in high technology figuring out how to do this. Why? Because they knew they couldn't do it day after tomorrow, otherwise it would cost more jobs than it would create. And they knew all the stakeholders had to be involved so they could plan a way to make this good economics as well as good for the environment and good for your pocketbook. But it was done by a network of cooperation that was public and private, and that included civil society groups, in this case the environmental organizations. But this is a real problem. We can't keep price and higher education out of the market. Yesterday, I was in New Orleans, and I went to a fascinating high school graduation with a program that is now in just 6 American cities. And Mr. Mayor, you might think about trying to bring it here. It's an after-school program called College Track, started by Laureen Jobs, who is the widow of the late Steve Jobs. And full disclosure, they were good friends of Hillary's and mine, and became so because they gave us a place to stay when our daughter was at Stanford so we could see her privately. So my friendship with them was not political, it was personal. But she became obsessed with the fact that she came from a modest home, and even when she met Steve Jobs, he didn't have all that money. And so she was a self-supporting professional. And so she started this program to organize after-school programs for kids who would never go to college. And there were 37 kids, poor kids, from tough backgrounds in New Orleans yesterday that were in this after-school program for 4 years. 100% of them have been accepted to more than one 4-year college, and are going. 100% of them. Why? Because the school system and the local business community and the young people that do this work got together and figured out how to do it. Then there's one guy who was literally one of the most talented tap dancers I've ever seen, got up and spoke. He learned how to tap dance on the streets of New Orleans. That's how he earned money on the side. And he wasn't making enough money, so he stole a purse and was going to have to go to jail. And instead, he winds up in this program, and he was displaced from Katrina, wound up in Houston, as a lot of people did, and they discovered he was 13 years old and couldn't read. And he'd just been passed along. So he got to read. He came home to New Orleans. The families got reunited. and he's graduating with honors from his high school, listen to this, he's become such a good writer, he was admitted to Bard College in New York City. This kid, he could have been in jail. Why? Who did that? The community did that together. That's what you're doing here. And so every one of these problems we've got can be fixed. We've got infrastructure problems in the cities, the old cities of America like New York. We need to redo the water lines. Chicago does. The bigger the city, the more money can be saved by businesses if you can find out an economically efficient way to retrofit all the buildings so they use less electricity, and you give the power plant free power. You give the utility free power back so they can support economic expansion in Jacksonville without raising everybody's utility rates to build a new power plant. We did it with the Empire State Building. I worked with Johnson Controls, and they reduced, and they guarantee how much you'll save. They're going to reduce the Empire State Building, built in 1931, they're going to reduce their utility usage 38%. It created 275 full-time jobs for a year and a half, just working on that one building. We changed the windows, changed the heating and air conditioning, put in smart temperature and lighting controls, and did a bunch of other stuff. But the point is, it turned out to be good economics, and it's going to take them 4.5 years to recover their investment, after which their power bill drops 38%, which is a huge savings for the tenants and the owner. And they gave a mini power plant back to Con Ed. So New York can support relatively less expensive economic development. And so you have all these things that are going on out here, but we have to face the fact that we've got to deal with them. And so I was trying to think of very specific things that would fit your public-private partnership model. I have two of my children, Alvin Brown and Rahm Emanuel, who are mayors of big cities. And I go to Chicago a lot because Hillary's from there. And one of the best bipartisan ideas that seems to be dying on the vine in Washington was originally sponsored by a Republican senator from Texas, Kay Bailey Hutchison, and a Democratic senator, Senator John Kerry from Massachusetts, to let America join all other advanced countries in building modern infrastructure with both private and public funds. And you can structure these deals so they're affordable and they have a very good return on investment for pension funds, for example. And every other country does this. So in the current partisan atmosphere, this bill was going nowhere. So Rahm did something that you might do a smaller version here in Jacksonville. It's a much bigger city, Chicago. But he got all the banks and the investment banks and the business community together, and they put together their own plan for a citywide infrastructure bank to redo the water lines, modernize the infrastructure, and retrofit all the buildings with a structured, guaranteed return on investment for the investors, which meant they didn't have to commit nearly as much tax money. They did commit some because that brought the aggregate cost down so you could promise a rate of return. And they're going to create thousands of jobs doing this because they found a way to work together. And so if you look at every other, I'll give you another example. America, of one of our problems. America used to be first in the world in computer download speeds because we developed all our high-tech industry earliest. We now rank 15th. South Korea is first. And that means that they're 4 times faster than we are. What's the practical impact of that for you? Well, you've got as I understand it, the municipal jurisdiction here is very large and includes some rural areas as well as the urban areas. While I think you should, I agree with the mayor, you should focus on rebuilding downtown first and build it as strong as possible. If you want, if you want everybody to participate in this, there are a lot of small businesses that can make a lot more money if they had access to modern broadband. we helped when I was, after I left office and Hillary became a senator from upstate New York, she found these guys in a very tiny town in upstate New York who were making great fishing rods. And the guy said, you know, I think I could sell these everywhere, but I don't know, I can't access the internet. So she got some investment up there. They modernized the download speeds a little bit. And this guy had 2 people working for him. And all of a sudden he had 12 people working for him. And 100% of the people who brought his fishing rods were from Norway. And he lived in a tiny town because they modernized the computer download speeds. That's probably the cheapest infrastructure investment you can make. So, but you can't do that if you have a food fight. You got to get together and say, this is a problem. Let's figure out an economical way to solve it. So my advice, if you look at all these places where we're not competitive, where we need to be competitive, and if you look at all of our strengths, is obviously you just do the same thing for Jacksonville and you figure out what strategy will most quickly redevelop downtown. What strategy will be fairest to the people who live out in the more rural areas so they can participate in shared prosperity? Because if you have an interdependent environment, your goal has to be shared prosperity and shared responsibilities. Everybody carries a share of the load that they can, but everybody has a reasonable chance to benefit. And I think the other thing I would say is, if you know where you want this economy to go over the next 5 or 10 years, you need to rig your education system to produce people who can fill that economy. And I spend a lot of time studying what I think of as the prosperity centers of America, places where if you're at least inside that bubble, you would swear there never was a problem. And I'll give you a couple of examples. First, a tough one. The Cleveland Clinic has conducted this exhaustive study of the areas where there will be more jobs in healthcare, whether or not our current healthcare law is upheld, amended, or junked. No matter what, because of demographic trends, these are the areas where there'll be more healthcare jobs. And they have decided to take on the toughest nut in the American unemployment system, which is middle-aged people without a college degree who've been unemployed for 6 months or more. And they go right after them in a partnership with the local healthcare clinic, and they say, look, I don't care if you worked in an auto parts manufacturer. You want a job or not? If you do, come in here and train for this. And they are basically taking these people that everybody else had given up on and training them for tomorrow's jobs, and lo and behold, they're finding them. I'll give you an example closer to home. Orlando has the largest number of computer simulation companies in the entire country. Why? Well, first of all, if you ever take your kids to Disney World or the Universal Entertainment Park, you know that the better your computer simulation is, the better, more people want to go, right? Secondly, it's the home of the video game division of Global Entertainment Arts. And if, like me, you've ever been addicted to a video game, you know that maintaining this constant state of anxiety-ridden attention deficit disorder that video game addiction engenders requires really good computer simulation. But what you may not know is that as taxpayers, you put $5 billion a year into Orlando through the Defense Department and NASA, because it is much easier to train and much safer to train a young man or woman to drive a tank, fly a jet airplane, or take a spaceship up on a simulator than the real deal. So they're all there working together. University of Central Florida now has 53,000 students. And they change the curriculum literally every semester to feed the demand. And they hire professors that if they come up with an idea, they can license it to one of these companies. And if they get money from the licensing, even if the idea was developed with federal research dollars, the university gets to keep the money for more research. Best model in the world, by the way, I think, is, and parenthetically, that was adopted in a burst of bipartisanship in another very partisan year, 1980. When President Reagan was elected, President Carter signed this bill that passed with overwhelming bipartisan support that said, if you get federal research dollars, you come up with an idea that has commercial viability, the university can license it and keep the money as long as you keep putting it into research. And MIT's got the best program in the country. They don't take any money because they want to lower the cost of starting a new business. Something you should think about here. They lower the cost of starting a new business because they won't take any money. And if their idea turns out to be no good, at least it hadn't cost you anything. But they take a piece of the company, a modest piece, which means if you hit the jackpot, they get to ride up with you, which is the right way to do it. Shared prosperity, shared responsibilities. So anyway, Orlando's rocking along pretty good. But there are all kinds of other things. You've got a lot of people in Florida and all over America. We talk about childhood obesity. There's still a lot of hungry people in this country. There are counties in Florida where 1 in 4 families don't know where their next meal's coming from. So increasingly, large food chains are organizing themselves to save the food and to distribute it to people who need it. And interestingly enough, the communities, I only know this because my daughter did a special on it on NBC the other night. So I give my kid credit. She knows more than I do about everything anyway now. But anyway, but what she found was she asked the head of the Darden chain, which is Olive Garden restaurant, Longhorn Steakhouse, and one of the big seafood chains. She said, doesn't this cost you more than just throwing the food away? He said, yeah, because we have to save it and meet health standards and distribute it. But he said, you know, it brands us. People know we do it. More people want to come in here now because they think we're doing something good for the community. And it actually improves the economy of the community because it creates jobs in the food distribution chain that otherwise would not be there, giving hungry kids and often their hungry parents a chance to get a good meal. There's like non-governmental options that, if you do them right, actually add to the employment base of the community. But every single one of these examples, you know, I like, because it's what I know, I like having a comprehensive program to retrofit every school, every hospital, every auditorium, every municipal building, every state building, and make them as energy efficient as possible, because you get 7,000 jobs for every $1 billion you spend on it. And because you can make it a just say yes system where you just pay it off through your savings, so nobody ever has to pay any more per month in their utility bill. But there are a lot of other things you can do. You got your Blue Cross person here. We were talking about this. I'm really impressed with a lot of the work Blue Cross is trying to do with healthcare providers to lower healthcare inflation. Whatever your politics on this, just remember this: the worst thing we can do with healthcare is to keep on doing what we've been doing. That's the worst thing we can do, because we're spending almost 18% of our income on healthcare. No other wealthy country in the world spends more than 12, 17.8 to 12. That's the Netherlands, and they have an individual mandate, which, as you know, is a big controversy for the Supreme Court. I can't figure out why it's a controversy, because John Adams, you remember old John, he was one of the framers. John Adams in 1797 signed an individual mandate to buy health care that I never see written about, but the bill said if you were a seaman, you had to have hospitalization insurance. Otherwise, America's commerce could not go on. You had to know that seamen could be made healthy again. And if your employer decided not to buy it for you, it said your pay would be docked, and the bill specifies how much your pay would be docked to pay for your hospitalization. And the reason is simple, that now if you assert the right to get sick or be in an accident and have your neighbors pay for it. That's essentially what is happening. It's adding a lot of cost to the system. So the Blue Cross especially in a lot of states is doing a lot of work with healthcare providers trying to move from pay for procedure to pay for performance. That'll save a lot of money. Trying to figure out how to stop the excessive administrative costs in the system, which puts a lot of sand in the gears. And you know why you should care about that? Because that $1 trillion we pay that we would not pay if we had any other kind of healthcare system is one big reason middle-class people don't get a pay raise. I mean, a lot of business owners, you think they'd really like never giving their employees a pay raise in the last decade? They didn't do it because they were greedy and pocketing the money. They did it, by and large, because their built-in costs were so high that money that would have gone to pay raises or to hire new people went to pay costs that they would not have paid if we had a more competitive environment. Now, you should care about that from a business point of view, because just think about it. If even 25% of the difference in what we pay for health care and what we could, if we had a more cost-effective model, went into pay raises, that would be $250 billion a year that ordinary middle-class people would have that they would spend in the economy. That means more restaurants for downtown Jacksonville. It means stores can stay open and sell things. So again, but you can't just do this. You can't just talk about it. You've got to figure out how to do it that works for people. And it requires cooperative networks. But I was very impressed at the conversation I had with your Blue Cross executive about that. So if I were you, I'd think about first, rebuild the downtown. Because cities are the opportunity centers of 21st century America. And they just are. And second, I'd make a list of all the problems and all the strengths, and I would overhaul the education and training system to feed the jobs you're trying to create. You'll get them. I was in Silicon Valley the other night. It's like another world out there, you know, it's all back. And I'm sitting there looking around this thing, and I was sitting with 14 people whose combined net worth was over $50 billion. And I thought, you know, but they're creating a lot of jobs. But here's what they told me. They said if we could solve the shortage in science, technology, engineering, and math, there would be 3 million more jobs available for young Americans today. Today. Think what that would do to the unemployment rate. So we got to convince young Hispanic Americans, young African Americans, we got to convince young women that have abilities in these fields that they will get jobs. Right now, the college graduate unemployment rate is half the national unemployment rate. But for very young college graduates, it's only 25% below the unemployment rate because the job mix is not there and the job growth trajectory is not great. If we really worked at training people for the jobs that are there, the unemployment rate would be half the national average from the day they got out of college. And that's really, really important. It's something you can do. And then I would bloom where you're planted. Look what you can do. The cost of solar panels has dropped 50% in a year. And the good news is it's cheaper. The bad news is it collapsed the market and it'll probably rebound. But all over the country, people are working out systems where companies and homeowners put up solar panels that they don't own. Somebody else will put up the cash and you just pay for that portion of the utility that comes out of the sun. But in a place like Florida, in New Jersey, where the sun doesn't shine as much as it does in Florida, the way they've got it rigged up, it's much cheaper for people's utility bills to put the solar panels up and either let the company that installed them or the local utility own them and then pay their bill based on that new energy mix. And it creates a lot of jobs. Somebody have to put them up. All the jobs are not in the manufacturing. The jobs are largely in the installation and the maintenance and the whole supply chain. So you have a lot of things you can do here and a lot of things that you know far better than I. But the most important thing is this. You're here in this room. And everywhere I go in the world, whether it's tiny Costa Rica, massive Brazil, Orlando, San Diego, which has more Nobel Prize winning scientists than any other city in America now, because it's the center of human genome research, Silicon Valley, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, which is re-engineering its economy. What works are when people sit down and work together. Not because they don't argue, not because they don't have differences of opinion, but because their goal is to use their differences to create strength in unity to take a new direction. The issue in America is not whether we're going to go right or left. The issue is whether we're going to go forward or stay stuck right where we are. And so you've made a decision to go forward. I'm very proud of your mayor because he instinctively gets this. But your fellow Americans, we all have a decision to make. We're either going to share the future in a positive way, or we will be condemned to share it in a negative way. Because interdependence is simply a fancy way for saying divorce is not an option. You may be able to get away from your neighbors for an hour or so, but not permanently. All over the world, all the borders look more like nets than walls. And so we just have to keep finding a way to build shared responsibilities and shared prosperity. I'd say you've got a great head start. Keep it up. Thank you very much.